Hey there, my name is Jeremy Ginsberg, and in this video, I want to talk about two very popular and powerful healing exercises that are both forms of breath work. And they are opposite from one another, and they have a lot of contradicting beliefs. And I am one of the few people that I know who have experienced a lot of both of them. One of them is called the Wim Hof Method. Wim Hof is this Iceman, extreme Dutchman who is very famous for his Guinness World Records. He's been on Vice, Joe Rogan, CNN, BBC, all these big stuff. And basically, he's a lover of the cold. That's why they call him the Iceman. He's got this breath technique that's very powerful, and I've gone through the online course. I've actually worked closely with the company. I was doing more of a marketing role at the time, but I'm friends with them and love that. So Wim Hof. The second one is called the Buteyko Method. That's Buteyko, Buteyko. He's a Russian professor from the former Soviet Union who essentially established this beautiful breathing exercise that is backed by science and has tons of data. So is the Wim Hof as well. And these two exercises are both very powerful. They're both healing. They both have a ton of scientific evidence that backs up why it works, and they have so many testimonials and stories, and they're both completely natural. It's just using breath, really. And I first discovered the Wim Hof method about 2015, I think, or 16, when I was experiencing a lot of daily headaches. And I was doing it a lot, and I loved it because before that, I was getting so many headaches. I was just taking a lot of marijuana and smoking or eating it. And this was kind of the first natural pain reliever that I found with just breathing. So I was super into it, to the point where I was just like hanging out with all my friends. I was like, hey, you want to try this cool breathing exercise? And I was just like totally a disciple of this. And I experimented with it a lot. On planes, buses, in a float tank, at plant medicine ceremonies, like pretty much I find myself often just in bathrooms at restaurants or bars because I wasn't feeling well. So I would always run away and use this, and it's beautiful. And then basically what happened is I hit this point where I realized it wasn't curing. It wasn't hitting at the root problem for whatever was causing these headaches. So I took a step back, and I wasn't doing it as often, and I noticed that it was helping me a lot in the short term. I would go up and feel amazing, connected, feel good, pain relief, but then in the integration I was feeling a lot worse, and sometimes it would have this like after effect that would actually make the pain even worse. So then I discovered the Butyeko method, and this excited me a lot because it was just completely new, and it was just something that I'd never heard of before, and that excited me. And so basically I did Wim Hof religiously for like a year and a half, and then I did Butyeko probably even more religiously for a year, probably 10 to 11 months. And I worked with the Butyeko team, I hired a personal coach, and then I had to let that go as well because I was just like not getting better. And I reached out to them, and they're like, oh, you got to keep doing it. I'm like, gotta let go. So here's me making this video just based on my experience, and this is unbiased. I love them both. They both bring a ton of benefits, and now I find myself doing both. So that's just my background, but now I want to get into the specifics. So I start with Wim Hof. What is Wim Hof method, and how is it different than holotropic breathing or shamanic breathing? It comes from Tibet. It's this Tibetan fire breathwork practice that I'm pretty sure if you go and really study it from a master and a teacher, it's one of those processes that takes a long time. You really have to go one step at a time, find a teacher, and it takes a long time to master, and you gotta be in your center. A lot of this traditional Eastern apprenticeship type mentality. That's from what I know. This could be wrong, but that's from what I know because I actually wrote an ebook for the Wim Hof team, and so I know about this story because I was helping out with their content. So essentially the practice, what it is you're inhaling and then letting go. And it's this form of hyperventilation where you're just relaxing and breathing in deeply. And you do that repetitively for about 30 to 40, 50 times. And then you exhale, and it's breath retention. So the last one, inhale, and then you hold. So essentially you're building up this surplus of oxygen, then you're exhaling, and then you're retenting your breath. So there's no air in your lungs, but your body's still full of oxygen. And that creates this beautiful response where tingling happens and norepinephrine and cortisol is triggered, and you start to feel serotonin and maybe some DMT, and it's got this beautiful reaction. And the science is all there. If you go to the Wim Hof method, they've got so much scientific data backing this up, which is really cool. And the most groundbreaking part of this was that for a while they thought Wim Hof, this Iceman, was just crazy because he's like going into ice baths and taking swims in the cold and hiking mountains just in his underwear and doing this weird breathing, and they literally thought he was from a different species. But then he trained 7 or 10 individuals for a week or 5 days, and then he brought them into a lab where they injected toxin and poison into these people's bloodstream, and through this breathing exercise they were able to influence their atomic nervous system on the spot using the power of the mind and the power of the breath. So this is groundbreaking for science, because at that point nobody realized that we had the power to influence our immune system that fast in that capacity. So the Wim Hof method is about over breathing. It's about taking in a lot of oxygen and breathing into everything, and basically on this foundation that we don't breathe enough. We don't get enough oxygen in our day-to-day lives, because a lot of times when we're stressed, we create this shallow breathing and we're not breathing enough, so therefore our cells don't get enough oxygen, and basically that leads to disease and cancer and all these things, just because our cells and our body isn't naturally healthy. Again, I'm not a scientist. This is just based on my experience. My goal is not to be perfect. It's more just to get the conversation started around Wim Hof Method and Butyeko, because they are opposite ends of the spectrum and they're both powerful, but not that many people do both of them because of that. So basically, the Wim Hof Method is different from holotropic and shamanic breathing because it has this retentive breath. And there are some yogic breath work that deal with this breathing out or breathing out and holding. There's a Taoist practice where you breathe out, then you like suck in your stomach, because I've just been fascinated with all forms of breath work, but I've yet to find a yogic practice or some from Chinese medicine or the East, or even from South America that's shamanic, that is exactly as the Wim Hof Method does. So that's exciting. And basically you do this, and then through the course you do about 1, 2, 3, and then 4 or 5 rounds. And basically you do 30, 40, and then you exhale and hold, and then at the end you take a deep inhale, and then you fill your body with oxygen again, and you feel amazing. And so that's the basis of the Wim Hof Method. And so while you're over oxygenating your body, you're also depleting your CO2 levels. And so this is where it gets tricky, because Butyeko is under their basis is that we are over oxygenated and we have lack of CO2, and we need to boost our CO2. Where Wim Hof says we don't have enough oxygen. I'm not sure if it's like we have too much CO2, but it's basically like we need more oxygen. Breathe. Wim Hof even says, breathe, motherfucker. And it's this basis that like we got to get more oxygen, get the blood and body pumping and more energy. And Butyeko is the exact opposite. So let's talk about Butyeko. Butyeko was a Soviet Union scientist, researcher, and basically he started noticing a lot of patterns between people that are unhealthy and like their breathing patterns. And honestly, I don't know as much about the story. It's not as exciting as Wim Hof, but basically he started realizing that by increasing our CO2 levels, it creates this positive response in our nervous system, and it like again helps us heal, and it triggers this response where basically it's under this belief that it's not that we have too much oxygen and not enough CO2, but the basis of one of his findings was that when we breathe, it's not like we're breathing in oxygen and we breathe out CO2. Rather, the what's going on is far more complicated than that. And that in order to heal our bodies and find that perfect balance and equilibrium, it's finding that balance between CO2 and oxygen. Because if we're over breathing, it kind of leads to this, okay, now we're going to take in more oxygen, and now we need more oxygen, and it's kind of this like incremental growth towards unhealthiness and imbalance. And that if we're over breathing constantly, we don't end up having the right balance of CO2, so our body's kind of always in this like minor stress state. So we need to bring it back to homeostasis, I think is the word, and equilibrium. So how do you do that? This is where Wim Hof is just like totally takes the cake, because you do Wim Hof Method and it feels good. It's exciting, expansive. Sometimes you can go to peak experience and like psychedelic. I've seen lights. It's just like totally this blissful state. The first time I did Butyeko, you're under breathing. It's shallow breathing. You're going through this constant state of breath hunger. And so it's not comfortable. It's painful. It's hard. Your body is literally like, we gotta breathe. We gotta breathe. So basically what the practice is you plug your nose, you breathe normal, then you plug your nose, allowing the CO2 levels to rise. And then your body slowly wants to like take these deep breaths, but instead you slowly train your diaphragm to expand so it can house more CO2. And then after holding your nose, you don't open your mouth at all, because as I'm talking, I'm getting rid of CO2. So that's another aspect of Butyeko. It's really a lifestyle. It's a huge lifestyle, and I can go into that later. But now, so you basically just hold, and then when you feel the need to breathe, you take shallow baby breaths from your nose. Putting my finger here because then you can feel it. Belly, rapid, shallow breaths. So you're holding your breath, but not like a deep inhale or retention, just very natural. The Butyeko is a very grounding practice. It's a very simplistic. It reminds me of Lao Tzu or some of those people. And then building up CO2, and then when your body wants to breathe a lot, it's like just breathe baby breaths. So it's like raising the CO2, and then it's not even your body saying, hey, we need more oxygen. It's more your body saying, we've got too much CO2. So it's slowly training your body to be able to hold more CO2 over time. And I did that for 90 minutes for about 10 months, 11 months. And that's probably the most committed I've ever been, maybe to anything that's like that time consuming in my life. Even as in high school, I was on the basketball team, but you know, we had practice and games, so we had days off. This was every single day when I woke up, before lunch, before dinner, and before I went to bed. At least 4 times a day. I was often doing this consistently. And throughout the entire day, Butyeko says, don't ever breathe through your mouth. It's under this belief that we're not meant to breathe out of their mouths. If you look at animals, they only breathe out of their mouths when they're stressed or like running away or running towards prey. It's not something that they're naturally just going to be like breathing. Maybe they take a yawn. And so it's really just always breathe out of your mouth. So what are the practices in the Butyeko method? It's like they recommend to sleep sitting up, because you get rid of less CO2. They strongly encourage you to tape your mouth shut. They have this strict diet based on foods that generate more oxygen in the body. So a big one is like no chicken, basically no fats and like heavy meats, dairy. Chicken is like the biggest one. It's like no chicken, because apparently that makes our body submit more oxygen, or it takes up CO2 to digest the chicken. Again, not so sure, but like pork and beef are really fine, but chicken's not, and like fish is really not. So it depends on the food. What else? Exercise was a big one, because I basically took a break from going to the gym because I'm not supposed to take deep breaths. So how I learned to exercise is bench press, and you're basically just meant to keep this steady, calm breath throughout the day, instead of Wim Hof where so it's this like super opposite approach. Another big belief about Butyeko is they're just like less breathing, less eating, less sleeping. And so those are some really big mindset shifts that took me some time to adapt, and now I'm like shedding the ones that don't serve me. And again, I'm just sharing my story based on what I've learned, and the intention of this video is really to get a conversation started. I'm not trying to say one is better than the other because they're both so powerful. I've had some peak experiences doing the Butyeko method. Even though the first month it was horrible and hard and I felt like I was fighting and it was a challenge, once I got past that, it started to be something that I was like, all right, now this feels kind of good. After 2 months, I would say no matter how I was feeling, it made me feel 10 to 30% better. And sometimes I had a horrible migraine. It just like took me a little bit better and it wasn't that great. But other times it took me from feeling a little bit off balance or tired or having a headache or stressed. And then I do 3 rounds and I'm just like totally blissed out, totally grounded and like feeling in my power. And that's why I'm really curious, because I feel like both of these are 2 rivers that tap to the same ocean. But not that many people have been talking about this. So if you have any experience, if you have tried both of these, let me know. I'd love to talk, because basically what I know of available for resources outline, you can go to wimhofmethod.com and they have an online course, and they also do in-person workshops and they treat your trainings, and you can go to Poland and hike the mountain with him, and they have tons of science to back this up. But when I talked to them and told them about the Butyeko, they were interested, but they're doing their own thing. And then with the Butyeko, they're basically like really, really anti Wim Hof. And towards the end, part of the reason I stopped doing Butyeko is because I was just feeling so much better doing the Wim Hof method. And the Butyeko people were like, don't do it, it's really dangerous, you gotta stick here, hyperventilation is bad for you, you're gonna die younger if you do it. And it just left me in this like fear, and I didn't want to take action based on fear, so I just kind of took a step back. And looking back, I love both of them. Martha, if you're watching this, I love you. Bart, yeah, I love both, and this comes from a place of love. But Vladimir, Jack, I guess now I feel like I need to call out all the people that I talked to from both companies. But I just do feel like there's something there. And I've heard people comment that Butyeko himself was a fan of the Wim Hof method, and he said it was good. But now he's not around anymore, and he's just trained people, so it's like hard because, we don't really know. So now I've been feeling so much better based on my past 2.5 years of a lot of daily chronic pain. And I'm finding that it's really about using the best tool at the best time. So the other night I did 2 rounds of Wim Hof, and then after I did Butyeko to bring back, because I do feel like there's a beautiful balance between the two. Wim Hof is a great way of using fire, of taking like extra energy and kind of bringing it in, but it's more of this upper chakra, like expansive, connecting with your highest self and feeling these feel-good chemicals of serotonin and dopamine, where I feel like Butyeko is more grounding. It's just like, all right, back into my body. Okay, I gotta breathe. It's like you can't really worry about your finances or what you're going to do tomorrow when your diaphragm and your whole body is like, we got to get rid of CO2. It's like this deep struggle. And on the other side of Wim Hof, it's like you breathe into it. So it's kind of like seeing the resistance and then breaking through, where Butyeko is like, it's here. Then it's like, all right, let's come back here, figure out our fire and ground and gain energy. And then like slowly this will come back naturally and like this will go away. So that's all I have to share at this point. The breathing technique isn't all the Wim Hof method. There's also cold exposure and other stuff. And Butyeko is a fan of cold exposure, and they say like that's really good and healthy. And so there is some overlap of the philosophies and the ways of living, a lot of just like natural healing and trust your body, and you can train your brain and the power of the mind and all these things. So there's so much in common, but these 2 huge fundamental beliefs of like, all right, we need more oxygen, all right, we need more CO2. Those are where I feel a little bit stuck, and I don't feel like I have the scientific background to really make a bold statement. I will say that from experience of testing my control pause, which is what Butyeko uses to measure your CO2 levels, it's just a way of keeping track of yourself so you know where you're at. I noticed that after doing the Wim Hof method, I was able to have more CO2 in my body. So my CO2 levels went up short term. However, the long-term effect, it's unclear because I wasn't like consistently doing both and then checking in. But yeah, a little bit of a mystery for today. So I'm just curious if one of them calls out to you, I say go for it. I feel like our intuition has this, inner GPS that gives us signals on what's attractive and what's appealing. But I don't want to give any advice and say one is better than the other because they're both very powerful. I've heard amazing stories from Wim Hof of miraculous healings. Same with the Butyeko. They have tons of testimonials and stories, and both can be incredibly powerful. Both of them helped me a lot. They definitely were powerful vehicles on my journey, but I wouldn't say it was the sports car that took me past the finish line. They were something that came, I drove in it, I felt it out, felt good, and then eventually I had to get off and walk my own path. And I'm okay with that. That excites me because now I can be here to share the story. If Wim Hof Method would have done it all, I would have never learned about Butyeko. And if Butyeko would have done it all, I probably would have had judgments about the Wim Hof Method. So I'm going to end this video here. Please leave a comment. Keep the discussion going. We'd love to see some articles about this stuff. And if you're interested in more videos contrasting the two, let me know, because I don't know anybody else who's actually paid and gone through both courses and committed as intensely as I have. Thank you so much, and talk soon.